A true holy confessor of these latter times, His Eminence Most Reverend Metropolitan Philaret, 1903 to 1985. On the feast of the Synaxis of Archangel Michael and all the bodiless powers, commemorated on November 8th Old Calendar, November 21st New Calendar, in 1985, reposed in the Lord His Eminence Most Reverend Metropolitan Philaret, first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Born George Nikolaevich Voznesensky in the city of Kursk, Russia in 1903, he emigrated with his family to Harbin, China in 1920 to escape the excesses of the Bolshevik Revolution. After the death of his mother, his father received the monastic tonsure and was consecrated Bishop of Hylar. He was active in the Russian Orthodox Church life in Manchuria until the invasion of that country by Soviet military forces, when he was repatriated to the USSR and died. As a young man, George Nikolaevich completed his theological training in Manchuria in 1931. That same year he was ordained deacon and priest and received the monastic tonsure with the new name Philaret, after Saint Philaretos the almsgiver. In 1934 he was raised to the rank of igumen, and in 1937 to that of archimandrite. Archimandrite Philaret fulfilled various priestly duties in Harbin, Manchuria until 1950. He became known for his opposition to the Soviets and his rejection of the hope that any substantive change with regard to freedom of religion would be forthcoming in the USSR under Stalin's regime. He categorically refused to accept a Soviet passport, despite tremendous pressure from those Russians deluded by the Soviet propaganda, including his own ecclesiastical supervisors. The Synod of Bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, which had by then established itself in New York, tried persistently to obtain an exit visa for him. But it was not until 1962, when the onset of Chairman Mao's Cultural Revolution, that Archimandrite Philaret was finally permitted to travel to Hong Kong. From there he went immediately to Brisbane, Australia, where a considerable number of his former parishioners from Harbin had settled. Those parishioners deluged the chancery of the Synod of Bishops with petitions urging his consecration as Bishop of Brisbane. This movement received the support of the late Archbishop Sava of Sydney, who felt the need of a vicar bishop, and in 1963 the consecration was celebrated. In 1964, at the Council of Bishops, during which the elderly Metropolitan Anastasia of blessed memory announced his retirement as first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, the young Bishop of Brisbane, who had accompanied Archbishop Sava to the meeting, was chosen to replace him. As first hierarch, Metropolitan Philaret distinguished himself by steadfastly opposing any organic participation of the Orthodox churches in the ecumenical movement. His letters to the late Patriarch Athenagoras of Constantinople and to Archbishop Iakovos in America, and his sorrowful epistles to all Orthodox bishops clearly set forth his stand in that respect, as did his criticism of the infamous Thyatira Confession, published by the late Archbishop Athenagoras in Britain. In 1965, he presided over the glorification of St. John of Kronstadt in New York City, the first canonization of any saint celebrated in the United States, and subsequently he oversaw the glorifications of St. Herman of Alaska, 1970, San Francisco, St. Xenia of St. Petersburg, 1978, New York, and all the new martyrs and confessors of Russia who have shone forth under the persecution raised by the atheists, 1981, New York. It should be noted as well that more saints and martyrs were canonized during the life of Metropolitan Philaret than any ruling hierarch in the history of the Church. Vladika Metropolitan Philaret as well showed a great spiritual concern for all of his dioceses as a metropolitan. In England, after the repose of Archbishop Nicodeme in 1977, Metropolitan Philaret shouldered responsibility for the British diocese until Bishop Constantine was appointed. During this period, he several times visited England and showed a lively interest in the attempts to bear missionary witness. It was under his loving guidance that the first plans made for the reception and enshrinement of the sacred relics of St. Edward the Confessor, and by his fiat a brotherhood was established. Vladika Metropolitan Philaret guided the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia for some 21 years, and during a very difficult period of her history. Through this period, many of the older Russian emigres began to die, and soberly and carefully the Metropolitan encouraged the growth of small mission parishes and monastic skeets. During his episcopate, too, numbers of Orthodox Christians from other ethnic backgrounds, particularly Greek Orthodox Christians, joined the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, seeking spiritual shelter from the gradual abandonment of Orthodox confession by their own hierarchs. The reception into a church which had been largely Russian hitherto of such groups and individuals was a matter which needed the Metropolitan's wise and careful pastoral oversight. Between 800 and 1,000 people attended the Metropolitan's funeral, which was held at the Cathedral of the Mother of God of the Sign in New York, on the Sunday after his blessed repose. 8 hierarchs, 31 priests, and 8 deacons led the service. At the end of the ceremony, when the faithful had given their archpastor the last kiss, his relics were taken to the convent of Novodevyevo in Spring Valley, where they rested the night. In the early morning they were taken to the Holy Trinity Monastery at Jordanville, where after the Divine Liturgy they laid to rest in the crypt of the cemetery chapel. This is a temporary resting place, because the Metropolitan's spiritual children are hoping that a memorial chapel will be built in the monastic graveyard, near the cathedral he loved and served in many times, and that Vladika Metropolitan Philaret's body will be finally laid to rest there. The handmaiden of God, Nadia Mokov, said, "This man was the kindest. He would take the youth that no one cared about and bring them into the church with nothing but kindness. He was a father to every single one of us." His care for the young people of the church was something that did indeed characterize his episcopate. His instructions to young people have been published in English translation, and only a year before his blessed repose the Metropolitan presided at the consecration of his vicar, Bishop Hilarion of Manhattan, to whom he particularly entrusted the spiritual care of the youth. Larry Binnis, in Newsday, Monday the 25th of November, caught the keynote of the Metropolitan's ministry by portraying him as kind bishop of Russian Orthodoxy. Let us all, good handmaidens and servant of our Holy Orthodox Church, never cease to forget to pray for the memory of our most beloved, blessed Metropolitan Philaret. A personal testimony. A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine. Having been appointed by the late Metropolitan warden of the Kursk Hermitage in Mayapak these 7 years, I had some occasion to know him. Our relationship was quite formal. I did not know him with that ease and intimacy with which so many others knew him, yet I thoroughly appreciated the quiet and intensely dignified presence of this gentle and angelic man who left us on the feast of the angels to join that heavenly choir. Great silence and time were mainsprings of his person. His very words were encased in silence. They arose out of silence. He seemed to wait there behind the silence so as to greet you in a holy place. He waited for us all, even the whole church, and condemned no man, neither did he despise any. Those who were foolish and naked he protected. He hated mockery. With the greatest respect and attention he waited, never to break, nor to spoil, nor wound, that in silence and in secret our hearts might arise in us and recall us again to the true love. He knew full well that wisdom and love and the redemption of a Christian soul can be neither legislated nor coerced. He gave time to men with an extravagant generosity. These gifts of time would suspend a human life in hope. For so many he bought a few more days, months, or years, in which a soul might be recalled, unbruised in kindness to his Christ. His very presence imparted a certain freedom, a freedom which probed the deepest recesses of the heart, seeking some shame and sanity that would enable the heart to be broken from within by the Lord himself. The Metropolitan lay in state in the Synod Cathedral those several days, magnificent still, with that same unbroken presence. An experience of terrible vacancy and loss, bankruptcy was on the faces of so many. Only the spiritual beauty and power of the Requiem service were able to address it. Like the eternal Russian monk described by a great Russian writer of the last century, Our Vladika kept the image of Christ fair and undefiled, in the purity of God's truth, from the times of the fathers of old, the apostles and the martyrs. Others will write historical descriptions of Vladika. We wished only to say a word about him here in Mayapak. Our rector, Archpriest Konstantin Fedorov, a spiritual son of Vladika, is certain that Vladika has not left us, nor ever will. He exhorts everyone to preserve the spiritual content of Vladika's injunctions, and to hold most dear Vladika's final testament to his flock, to hold fast and keep clean before God that which our Holy Church has given us from the beginning. Memory eternal. Simeon Richard, Kursk Icon Hermitage, Mayapak, New York. After the repose of His Eminence Metropolitan Philaret, the following message was found in his typewriter. No date has been indicated, however one must conclude that it was typed within a few days of the hierarch's peaceful repose. For us all, his spiritual children, it is his spiritual legacy and a reminder for us to live as true Orthodox Christians. Hold that fast which thou hast. Revelation 3:11. These words, taken from the sacred book of Revelation, have a particularly important significance in our time, our greatly sorrowful, wicked days which are full of temptation. They remind us of that priceless spiritual treasure which we, the children of the Orthodox Church, possess. Yes, we are rich, and this spiritual wealth is that which the Holy Church has, and which belongs to all her faithful children, the teaching of the faith, our wonderful salvific Orthodox faith. The countless living examples of the life of people who have lived according to the faith, according to those lofty principles and laws which the Church sets before us, and who have attained that spiritual purity and exalted state which is called sanctity. The beauty and magnificence of our Orthodox divine services, and a living participation in them through faith and prayer, the fullness of the spiritual life of grace which is accessible to each and every one, and what is the crown of all, the unifying of the children of the Church in that love of which the Savior said, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another." John 13:35. Metropolitan Philaret.